My father was in the Air Force for 20 years. In the late 1960s, he was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. It was a nuclear missile base. We were aware of rumors occurring at that time of unidentified flying objects coming in and hovering over the nuclear missiles, and the missiles malfunctioning shortly thereafter. The only country on Earth that has suffered the consequences of nuclear warfare is Japan. I would think of all peoples in the world who would be interested in this material, in this information, would be the Japanese people.
Today I'm here with Mr. Robert Hastings, the author of UFOs and Nukes, up in the mountainous center of Colorado.
Well, I came here because Mr. Hastings has a special message for the Japanese people.
What was the main reason you started doing the researches of UFOs and Nukes?
My father was in the Air Force for 20 years. In the late 1960s, he was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. It was a nuclear missile base. We were aware of rumors occurring at that time of unidentified flying objects coming in and hovering over the nuclear missiles, and the missiles malfunctioning shortly thereafter. This was pretty intriguing. I began my research in the early 1970s when other reports of this kind of activity surfaced in the media in America. And by 1973, I felt I had to begin interviewing U.S. Air Force veterans to see what they could tell me about these incidents. What I know at this point in time, many years later, is that the U.S. government is fully aware that UFOs, craft of vastly superior capabilities, have flown in and hovered over American nuclear missiles for many decades now, going back to the 1960s. On many occasions, when these strange objects hover over the missiles malfunction. They do not work. They need to be repaired. We know from documents smuggled out of the former Soviet Union that this occurred in Russia, in the Soviet Union as well during the Cold War era. This obviously is very important information. The U.S. government and other governments have kept it from public view. My opinion is that the public has a right to know the facts. I have attempted through my research and my lectures to present this information to the American public and to people all over the world. We have evidence in the form of documents and the testimony of former and retired Air Force personnel that UFOs have been monitoring and even interfering with American nuclear weapons for many, many years. I began interviewing U.S. military veterans in 1973. By 1981, I felt that I had enough testimony that I could present this to the public in a lecture form, and I began going out on the American college lecture circuit. I've spoken at over 500 colleges and universities around the United States, as well as Oxford University in England, and have presented this factual, documented evidence of UFOs and the interest of whoever are flying them in American nuclear weapons. By 2006, I felt that I could publish my book, and I prepared all of my research material. It was finally published 2 years later. My book was published in 2008. I appeared on Larry King Live on CNN with 3 Air Force officers, former officers, who were describing the incidents that I report in my book, where UFOs hovered above nuclear missiles and suddenly the missiles malfunctioned. By 2010, I felt that the American public still was unaware of this to a large degree. I'd sold many books, but still, people weren't talking about UFOs hovering over nuclear missiles. So I held a press conference in Washington, D.C. on September 27, 2010. To my amazement, CNN, the network, showed up at the last minute and streamed it live. So for over an hour, my discussion and the testimony of the 7 officers, former Air Force officers who were with me, was live streamed to the world over CNN, where they were discussing nuclear weapons being shut down by UFOs. We got massive worldwide publicity, even in Japan. I have articles in English but published in Japanese publications that reported what CNN had allowed to be live streamed. But within a week, it was as if it never happened. There were no follow-up interviews requested. All of these military officers would have given interview after interview after interview to the media. No one came to talk to them and ask them. At the time, we were treated very seriously and respectfully. We had the documents to prove what they were saying. We had these very distinguished officers discussing these incidents, but within a week, it was as if it never happened. That tells me that the media still views this as a silly story, a nonsensical story, something that's not quite real, something that shouldn't be treated seriously on an ongoing basis. So in reality, the media in the United States and the media around the world, I suspect even in Japan, is helping the government keep the secret because they don't treat this seriously, they don't seek out and interview these military witnesses. And so the government has an ally in the media, whether they know they're helping the government or not. That's exactly what they're doing. They're helping to keep this story under wraps. There's much skepticism about UFOs. That's understandable. It's a phenomenon that has suddenly come into our human realm of consciousness. We're suddenly confronted with a very mysterious phenomenon we don't understand. People who have experienced it firsthand, who've seen these craft in the sky, who do amazing things. The jets will chase them and they'll suddenly zip away at a very high speed, go faster than the jets. This has been seen by reliable people all over the world. Governments and the media and just public in general, the skepticism, say, nah, this can't be happening, these people are crazy, they're lying. But according to the documents, while the American government has telling people UFOs don't exist, we're not interested in them publicly, the documents clearly indicate behind the scenes, in great secrecy, the US government fully accepts the reality of UFOs, and they've judged them to be a national security matter. And part of that secrecy has to do with America's leaders do not want the American people to know that our nuclear weapons are being threatened, compromised by this outside force that is obviously much technologically superior to anything we have, any weapons we have, any defenses we have. They clearly are superior to it. So I understand skepticism on the part of people, but I would say there is such a difference, there is a difference between an informed opinion and just a good old regular opinion. If you have an informed opinion, that means you've studied the subject using credible sources of information, and then you have a knowledgeable opinion about what this is or isn't. Most people don't take the time to study this. They either think it's silly, they either think it's nonsense or science fiction, and they go, I don't need to learn about that, it's not real. But the people who study this, the people who take the effort to educate themselves, will find that despite what the public is being told by governments, UFOs don't exist. You know, in reality, what the government is saying in secrecy to each other is that yes, they do exist, and we're very concerned by what is going on, especially at the nuclear weapons sites.
Would you share some of the major incidents that you think convey important message for humanity?
The specific content, the information that's been provided to me by Air Force officers, they're either missile launch officers or nuclear missile targeting officers or missile maintenance personnel. They have told me that on many occasions that the launch officers will be underground in the launch capsule. They get a report from one of their security guards at ground level that a strange round object, a disc-shaped object, has come in and hovered over the missiles. Before the officers have a chance to say, you know, you're crazy or what are you talking about, suddenly on their consoles, on their display panels, the lights, the indications that the missiles are in trouble, that they're malfunctioning, began turning from green to red, one after the other, shutting down. This has been reported at every American nuclear missile base in the United States. The other type of incident that's being reported by these military personnel is the actual activation of the missiles. They don't shut down, they don't malfunction. What they do instead is suddenly the countdown sequence is activated. As far as these launch officers know, these missiles are preparing to launch. But after a few seconds, either the disruption, the odd phenomenon, the anomaly ceases and everything returns to normal, or the missile launch officers flip what's called an inhibit switch, which stops the launching of the missiles. My opinion is that those aboard the UFO are beings from somewhere else who are monitoring mankind's warlike ways. They now know that we have nuclear weapons and that if we use those weapons in warfare on a large scale, that we will endanger not only our civilization, but perhaps our own species. A nuclear attack, a massive nuclear exchange can potentially pollute the entire planet through radioactivity carried by the winds all over the world. So even countries that are not involved in the war would suffer the consequences of a nuclear exchange by two other countries, the nuclear powers. Clearly, something is going on. I think that whoever is aboard these craft are attempting to send us a message. They're wagging a finger at us, perhaps, saying, you're using these very destructive weapons now, you've got them. If you do launch them, if you do attack each other, that could be suicide for the human race. This, of course, is speculation on my part. No one really knows who they are, why they're here, why they do what they do. But I can clearly tell you, based on the documents and the testimony of over 150 U.S. Air Force veterans, persons I've interviewed, who say UFOs monitor and even tamper with our nuclear weapons. This is real. It's being kept from the American people and the rest of the world. I believe the public in all countries has a right to know these facts.
You mentioned that you would like for the Japanese people to know more about those facts, and you have the special message for those that are sufferers in their families of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Would you talk about it?
The only country on earth that has suffered the consequences of nuclear warfare is Japan. I would think of all peoples in the world who would be interested in this material, in this information, would be the Japanese people. War, of course, is terrible, no matter what kind of war it is, but nuclear warfare is especially terrible. The people of Nagasaki and Hiroshima suffered tremendously, both at the time, during the war, and in the many years since. We know that nuclear warfare creates effects that last many, many years, and into other generations, to the younger generations and younger generations. This is terrible beyond any belief in terms of the type of warfare that mankind have waged. I think those people in those two cities would be especially interested in this information, that some outside force that seem to fly these very advanced, technologically advanced craft are taking an interest in the nuclear arms race and have, according to the military sources and the American military documents that have now been released, are monitoring nuclear weapons. They are even disrupting the weapons from time to time. I think this is something that not only the people of Japan, but all humans should be made aware of and begin to ask, what is going on? Why is this information being kept from me, the public? Why is my government, or why is the American government lying to us, the public, year after year? It's something that I'm a lone voice in the wilderness. I've been gathering this data for many years. It's very difficult to believe. I understand many people don't even think UFOs exist. But if you look at the documents and if you read the testimony of my American sources, these missile launch officers, these missile maintenance officers who say UFOs have tampered with our nuclear weapons, these are not crazy people. These are not, people who have something to sell. They're people that the U.S. government trusted to start World War III. If the President of the United States had ordered a launch of nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles on the Soviet Union during the Cold War, these men would be the men who would actually turn the keys and launch missiles to hit Moscow, to hit other sites in the Soviet Union. They're very credible people, they're very reliable, and over 150 of them now have told me UFOs are real, They've flown around our nuclear missiles, and our missiles begin to malfunction when these objects hover over our missiles.
How come do you think the UFOs did not intervene and stop the atomic bombings in Japan?
That is a very good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you that one document exists from the U.S. Army from January of 1945, several months before the atomic bombings in Japan, that indicates that UFOs on 3 occasions in the month of January 1945 hovered above what is called the Hanford site in Washington State. It's a plutonium production site. The actual material that was in the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, the second bomb, was created at this Hanford site. And I've interviewed a retired U.S. Navy pilot, fighter pilot. His squadron of fighter planes was located right next to this plant to protect it during the war. He told me in 2009 that his squadron chased on 3 occasions in January of 1945 bright objects that were seen hovering over the plant silently. No propeller noise, no evidence of being an aircraft, just a bright light. When aircraft, these propeller fighters were sent up after this object, the object raced away faster than any aircraft then or now. And after this interview with me, much later, another researcher found the actual document confirming that UFOs were seen above the Hanford site on 3 occasions in January of 45. So we know that whoever they are were aware of nuclear weapons. They knew that these were being built in the early months of 45. Why they actually did not intervene and stop those bombs from being dropped, we don't know. But it is known at this point beyond a reasonable doubt that they were already aware that nuclear weapons were coming into existence, were being created, and that would probably be used in Japan or in Germany by the United States at some point. So it's difficult to answer why do they do this and not do that. As a researcher, I can only tell you what has been proven or what has been documented, and I can simply say that whoever they are knew about these weapons several months before the bombings. They clearly did not intervene, but the documents indicate that at least by December of 1948, 3 years after the end of the war, they began to fly around, UFOs began to fly around Los Alamos, where the bombs were invented, at other sites where we tested them in the Pacific, Bikini Atoll, Kwajalein. There were sightings of UFOs when we were detonating bombs in the atmosphere during the 1950s and 60s. So clearly they were monitoring the weapons tests. And again, we know from documents smuggled out of Russia in the early 1990s that there were sightings in the Soviet Union where UFOs were flying around and monitoring Soviet nuclear weapon sites. So they've been aware of the situation. Why they intervene at some times and disrupt the nuclear missiles, and at other times they just watch them and they do nothing, we really don't know.
Can I ask you about the new film you are working on?
Yes. I am currently producing a made-for-television documentary film called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. It should be completed in the spring of 2015. I'm hoping it will be on some American television network by the end of this year. Hopefully at some point it will be available in Japan with Japanese subtitles so your people can understand what people are saying. But I've spent 2 years now putting all of my decades of research into a 1-hour presentation of the documents to prove that this has gone on and that the American government has kept it secret, that they know UFOs exist, that they know that whoever is flying these craft are monitoring year after year, decade after decade, our nuclear weapons sites, that they've flown in and hovered above them, that they sometimes cause the missiles to malfunction. All of this is known, and the witnesses I have on camera are the actual launch officers who were involved in these incidents. They were aware of UFO activity at nuclear weapons sites, missile sites in particular. And they will be speaking on camera for the first time to America and the rest of the world and saying, this is real. This is not science fiction. This is not silliness. This is a very serious. Someone with advanced technology is monitoring America's nuclear weapons. And they believe, as I do, these officers, that the American public and the rest of the world deserve to know the truth.
You have done so much and developed some ways to propagate the information you gathered. What is out there for you now? What are your goals and hopes for the development of your endeavor in the near future?
I can only continue to do what I've been doing for 40 years now, is to gather the information and then publicize the information as best as possible. I use the analogy of a rock and water dripping on a rock. It takes a long time to wear the rock away. But as long as I continue speaking out and giving interviews such as this, the water is dripping on the rock. And hopefully the rock, the resistance, the preconceived notions that people have about UFOs will be dissolved away. And they will begin to look at this with fresh eyes and an open mind. They will begin to treat this as a serious subject that is worthy of their attention and their respect. So hopefully, over time, with this interview and the fact that there is going to be an article published in a Japanese magazine soon, hopefully, little by little, the door will open and people in Japan will know a little bit about my research and about the people that I've interviewed. And hopefully the Japanese media will slowly but surely understand this is a very important story and request interviews with my military sources. That is my hope.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Mr. Hastings.